There's an old saying in these hills: when the lanterns burn blue, the devil's got his eyes on you. And most folks write that off as superstition. But in Black Hollow, West Virginia, a town so forgotten even the maps don't bother with it no more, well, they know better. You see the woods here? Those woods are the kind where the trees grow too close together, where the mist never quite lifts, and where if you listen real close, you might hear something listening back. They got a memory. They got stories seeping out of them. And some stories, well, they don't stay buried. Folks in Black Hollow know better than to go poking around in those woods after dark. But on a chilly October night, not so long ago that their story's been forgotten, 5 teenagers decided to do exactly that. And what they found, it found them long before they ever went digging for it. The indigenous peoples had called what would become Black Hollow the Whispering Valley, said the trees spoke in the voices of the dead. When the settlers came, they ignored the warnings. They forged ahead, as men foolishly misguided by their own self-proclaimed destiny often do, and built a town in that valley. That town grew into Black Hollow, and those folks set about making lives for themselves. The families grew, and the roots were laid. And if them woods had ever been filled with haints, they'd long since moved on. But then, the first disappearance happened around the late 1800s. A trapper by trade, an ornery son of a bitch by reputation, Eli Wicker vanished near what's now called Devil's Dip. They found his dog 3 days later, lying at the base of an oak tree. Its eyes were gone. Not ripped out, but melted. Days later, they found Eli's body curled around the base of that same gnarled oak. His ribs cracked outward like something that hatched from his chest. That's when they saw the marks on the tree. They might have been names, might have been incantations. Dozens of them. All scratched deep into the bark in no language any living man knew. And at the bottom, freshly carved, Eli. The men didn't need to know any secret language. There wasn't no mistaking what the marks were spelling out. That night, the men of Black Hollow did what mountain folk do best. They lied. Said it were wolves that had gotten Eli after he got lost in those deep, dark hills. But as they buried what was left of him, the lanterns hanging in the pines, they burned black. Not dark, not shadowed, black. Like the flame was drinking the light instead of making it. By 1900, Black Hollow had a new tradition, the burying. Every Halloween, folks would leave offerings at the edge of the woods. Tobacco, moonshine, sometimes a live chicken. Anything to keep whatever lived in the pines happy. And that worked, up until about 1942. On October 29th, 1942, a group of men, led by Virgil Hayes, went into the pines with shovels, a Bible, and a length of chain blessed by Preacher Hale after whispers of a demon in the woods had spread through the hollow. Sure enough, they found what had been causing those whispers. And luck would have it, depending on how you see it, what they found looked feral, starving, like an animal that's forgot how to hunt down its meals. What they claimed to find there? Well, Jesse McCree's granddaddy described it like this on his deathbed. Weren't no man, weren't no animal neither. It was wrong. Like God made something and then broke it. We got it down in a pit, wrapped it in chains, and buried it under the old wicker oak. But just before we covered it, they laughed. Said we was just putting off the inevitable. The men swore secrecy, took the truth to their graves. Most of them anyway. Because 3 weeks later, Virgil Hayes walked into the pines and never came out. They found his coat hanging from a branch, his journal lying on the ground with blood smear across it. His coat pockets were full of teeth. What Virgil Hayes and his men had found in 1942 weren't the devil. It was older, hungrier. The older folk had tales of the Gristle Crown, the eater of names. But being so ancient, it remembers when these mountains were ocean floor. It doesn't just kill you, it unwrites you. Choose your history out of the world like gristle from a bone. When Virgil and those men buried that thing in the ground, they wrapped it in chains that wept rust, buried under 7 layers of shattered mirrors so it couldn't see itself, salt mixed with grave dirt so it couldn't rise, and the bones of children so it couldn't call to more of them. But chains break, and salt washes away, and bones remember. The last thing Virgil ever wrote in his journal was, "It ain't got no face, just holes where faces ought to be." Now, I'm sure you've seen those lanterns swaying in the pines. They ain't glass, never were. The oldest ones made from rib cages, the ribs of the first 12 people who tried to leave Black Hollow after the 42 burying. The metal ones came later, forged from melted down church bells. Every single one of them's got a name scratched inside of it. Virgil Hayes, his lantern burns coldest. Preacher Hale, his swings the slowest. Little Meg Wickers, hers sings when the wind blows just right. And here's the truth no one wants to say. Those lanterns, they ain't warnings. They're bait. Worms on the hook just wriggling around, hoping you got a hunger deep enough to bite. Their light doesn't keep the darkness out. It shows the darkness where to walk. And I suppose we could dwell on the past all night, but whether we like it or not, time's going to do what time does, and the past is going to bleed into the present. And the present's where Jesse McCready and his friends found themselves in a mess of trouble that they couldn't pray away. It started, as these things often do, around a campfire. Jesse McCready, a lanky, loud-mouthed 17-year-old with a knack for trouble, leaned in and said, "Y'all ever hear about the devil buried in the pines?" His friends laughed. Of course they'd heard it. Every kid in Black Hollow grew up on that story. That story of how back in the 1940s, a group of townsfolk supposedly trapped the devil himself, chained him up, buried him deep in the woods near the old Wicker farm. But here's the thing. Jesse knew all about his granddaddy's deathbed confession. Knew that he swore it wasn't just a story. Talked about a marker, a gnarled oak with an X carved into it. Mattie Ann, skeptic of the group, she rolled her eyes. Nicole cracked a joke about moonshine and senility. But Riley got that look. The one that says, "I know this is a bad idea, but I'm in." And Tyler just wanted an excuse to skip curfew for the night. So, against all better judgment, they grabbed flashlights, a couple shovels, and headed into them pines. Jesse led them to the oak, and sure enough, there it was. A deep, jagged X, cut so long ago the bark had grown around it like a scar. So they dug, and the second they hit dirt, 3 things happened in Black Hollow. Every dog started howling. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. And up the trees, those old glass lanterns, the ones no one's lit in 50 years, they flickered on. But teenagers don't heed warnings, so they kept digging. At first, it was all jokes. What if we hit hell? What if the devil's just a skeleton in a cheap suit? But then, thunk. When Jesse's shovel hit that box, the temperature didn't just drop. The air dropped, like the woods inhaled and forgot to exhale. They busted on open that wooden coffin, expecting some kind of creature to come leaping out at them. But inside, there weren't no demon, no devil. Nothing in there but shattered glass, yellowed bones, and a pile of rusted chains that hadn't held a thing captive since before any of the kids digging them up had come into this world. In the middle of all that mess was a second box. This one smaller than the coffin they had busted open. This box looked like it had been made out of burnt up wood, branded with markings. Something that could have been etched in the stars to signal the earth to put itself together. It was the kind of box you keep jewelry in, except no jewelry ever smelled like that. Like wet earth and the stench of sour tobacco juice. The odor rose up out of that hole like a gas leak. Mattie was the first to reach in and pull it out. The second she touched that box, she flinched. Said it was warm. And looking back, that's when they should have just tossed it right back down in that hole, and the earth should have been shoveled right back on top of it. But curiosity ain't easy to bury. Maddie, surrounded by the others who all looked glad it was her holding that box, whether they'd admit it or not, slowly lifted the lid, giving them all a look at what was inside. There was a key that had been carved from a human femur, bones from a left hand, and a vial with liquid sloshing around inside. It weren't blood, it was melted, stained church glass. But the worst part, the box was lined with skin, parchment thin, still sweating, and tattooed across it in faded ink, Maw. M-A-W. Now at this point, even Tyler, who once jumped off the roof barn because someone dared him, got real quiet. Riley whispered, "We should put it back." But Jesse just laughed. Said it was just some old hoodoo junk. Said his granddaddy was probably messing with him. And then that ground moved. Not like an earthquake, like something shifted underneath him. The flashlights flickered, and from somewhere deep in the pines, they heard it. A laugh. Low. Guttural. Wrong. And that's when they ran. Desperate now, they went to the only person in town who might believe them, Miss Abigail. She lived in a crooked little cabin at the edge of the woods, the kind of place with dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, and a black cat that watched you a little too closely. She took one look at that box and she went pale. "That ain't no devil's coffin," she said. "That's a binding box, built to seal a pact between hell and earth, and you done broke that deal. The symbols on the box, they weren't to keep no creature in. They were to keep something else in its slumber. And now it was awake, and it was wearing the devil's face." Whispering like she was telling tall tales in church, Miss Abigail spoke. "My granny used to say, ain't no king in these hills. Just a Gristle Crown picking his teeth with your granddaddy's spine." And at the mention of the Gristle Crown, the young'uns cast each other looks of confusion and fear. Feeling safe enough to raise her voice, Miss Abigail went on. "You gotta put it back the way you found it. But that box ain't empty no more and it needs filling. You best return to the oak marked with the X. Spill your blood on the carving of that box. Speak the words ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We return what we stole from the dark. And bury that damn thing deep down in the dirt. But you ain't getting out of this without paying. This thing wants a volunteer. Someone it can feed on for eternity." Jesse and Maddie shot each other looks. Tyler, Riley, and Cole stood in silence. And then they took off running, leaving Miss Abigail, Jesse, and Maddie behind to clean up their mess. Miss Abigail took to her cupboards and began speaking in tongues while she combined roots, bones, herbs, ash, and something the two teens didn't recognize but had the stink of death on it. With one last blessing, Miss Abigail handed Jesse and Maddie 2 small cotton bags, one for each of them. She said these were gree-gree bags, and were all she could do to try and give them a chance of escaping whatever fate the Gristle Crown might have had for them. With that, Jesse and Maddie were ushered out of Miss Abigail's cabin. When her door closed behind them, the two stared down at the bags in their hands. They walked back down the trail towards town, not speaking a word to one another, not having to. They both knew what the other was thinking. When they reached Maddie's home, Jesse looked at her, wanted to say something reassuring, wanted to tell her this was all just some old ghost story that's got them all spooked. But he couldn't lie to her. He knew she wouldn't believe him. And Maddie didn't need to be lied to nohow. A few hours before this moment, Maddie would have scoffed at this story if someone else was telling it to her, would have thought a fool of him. But now, Maddie felt the truth in her blood. Maddie Ann Wicker's family had the truth in their blood. She told Jesse to go on home and get some rest, that she'd find him later and they'd do what had to be done. With that, Maddie turned and disappeared into her home. Jesse stood and watched her door shut, then stood and watched a little longer. After a bit, he realized he'd been trying to turn and walk on home, but that his body was in too much fear to move. It took all his doing, but he eventually crawled into his bed, clutching that bag in his hand, waiting for the Gristle Crown. That night, each of the teens saw him in their sleep. A figure with 2 long limbs, eyes like smoldering coals, and a smile that split his face. He whispered things, promises, threats, and the worst part, he knew their names. Jesse. Maddie. You opened the door. Cole was the first to change. His mom found him standing in the cornfield at dawn, his mouth moving but no words coming out, just clicking like a beetle trapped in a jar. And when she turned him around, his spine was wrong. It wasn't broken, it was rearranged, like something inside him was trying to molt. And then his bones snapped and popped. His skin weren't no use to a skeleton no more. It sagged and draped as the bones protruded and tore open his flesh. Cole's mother saw her son's eyes filled with blood right there in front of her. His mouth open, tried to push out some last words, but none escaped. Right there in that cornfield, Cole's body twisted and knotted up something terrible. Bones branching out and blood dripping out like sap. Riley had begun compulsively carving names into her flesh that same morning. Not her own, but the other teens. The cuts didn't bleed. They just sunk into her flesh like they'd always been there. Her parents took to worrying when she wasn't at the table for breakfast. They never would have guessed that Riley had went back into those woods. She had ran as hard and as fast as she could back into the pines, compelled to do so by a force not her own. And when she finally collapsed to the ground, her eyes burned and the world went dark. She tried to scream, but her mouth filled with dirt, her throat with roots. When her parents found her, she was kneeling at the oak, her lips sewn shut with pine needles, her chest blooming open like a split seed pod. When whispers about Cole and Riley began making their way through Black Hollow, Maddie went and rustled Jesse up out of bed, told him what had befallen their friends, and then the pair went searching for Tyler after finding his home empty of any life. Because Tyler wasn't home. He hadn't been since he ran off with Miss Abigail's the night before. He'd been hiding out at the old grain silo. He'd fallen asleep there not long before the birds began their singing. A whistle woke him up, his grandfather's war whistle, clear as day, echoing from somewhere out in them woods. You see, Tyler's papaw had passed in '09, and that whistle was buried with him. When Jesse and Maddie found Tyler, he was sitting upright against the silo wall, still half asleep, his eyelids fluttering unnaturally fast like a dog dreaming. He appeared unharmed as they approached, but as they came up on him, Tyler's mouth opened. Maddie gasped when she saw that his tongue was missing. It hadn't been cut out. It just weren't there no more. As if something reached in and plucked it like ripe fruit, leaving no wound. In its place, a rusted whistle. A shrill note coming out of it that dug itself into Maddie and Jesse's ears, causing them to drop to their knees and try to block it out with their hands. When the whistle finally drowned under the sound of crickets and the chirping of birds, the two struggled back to their feet and laid eyes back on Tyler. Tyler's eyelids stopped fluttering. He was slumped over to his right, mouth open but his teeth clenched down on that old rusted whistle. In his lap sat a small cotton bag. At the sight of it, both Jesse and Maddie reached and felt the bags that Miss Abigail had given them. They were still there, hanging from their necks. Jesse knelt forward and reached for the bag in Tyler's lap, as cautious as you'd reach for a rattlesnake. When he grabbed it, it was damp, staining Jesse's hand with a dark red viscous. Jesse shot Maddie a look before opening the bag and emptying it out on the ground below. Out of that bag, a wet, clotted mess of black horsehair poured out onto the ground at a clump. It looked like someone had emptied out a spittoon right there on the ground. Tangled up in the mess of hair was something else. As if he no longer had control over his own body, Jesse grabbed the wet clump and brought it up for him and Maddie to examine. Tearing away the tangles of wet horsehair, which only let loose of what was binding sickening squelches, was Tyler's tongue, dried up and darkened. As Jesse's hand jerked away from it, letting it fall to the ground, the whistle clamped between Tyler's teeth once again and pierced the air. Only now it seemed to fill the air around Maddie and Jesse, only tickling their ears with a faint, shrill echo of what had just minutes ago brought them to their knees. This time the whistle was meant for the forest. The birds abandoned the trees. Any life that called them woods its home searched for a hole to climb into. Even the leaves turned upwards like they was desperate to float off to anywhere else. When the air around Maddie and Jesse returned to normal and the forest settled, Tyler wasn't slumped up against the silo no more. Looking around for their friend, Jesse saw him first and grabbed Maddie, turning her to look at what he was seeing so he wasn't the only one seeing it. Tyler was standing there at the edge of the woods. His face was blank, just a hole filled by nothing but darkness. His left arm was bent out like he was standing hand in hand with someone beside him. Jesse yelled out for him, and before the name had fully left Jesse's mouth, Maddie was in a full sprint running towards Tyler. No matter how hard and how fast she ran, though, Maddie couldn't get to him. It was like she was running in place. The entrance to the forest where Tyler stood seemed to just get further and further away. And after what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than mere seconds, Tyler was swallowed up by a fog rolling out of them woods that crept back into him and evaporated. Exhausted, Maddie fell to her knees as the tears welled up in her eyes and traveled down her cheeks like a drying up creek in the sweltering summer. The taste of salt washed over her lips as Jesse came running up behind her, putting his hand on her shoulder. Maddie could hear Jesse asking if she was okay, but he sounded miles away. And as his voice bounced around her head, she swore she saw a lantern's flame spark up deep in the blackness of the woods that now seemed to shroud them in an otherworldly haze. Maddie wiped the tears from her face and stood up resolute. Ignoring Jesse's questions about her well-being, Maddie slung her backpack off her shoulders and sat it on the ground. She opened it up as she knelt down and pulled the small box they had removed from the earth the night before. She stood up holding the box in her hand and told Jesse to give her his knife. Jesse, shifting from concern for Maddie to confusion, asked what she needed his knife for. Maddie snapped back at him that he had heard what Miss Abigail said. The Gristle Crown, the Eater of Names, whatever the hell it was. It wanted a volunteer before the pack could be made once again. Maddie Ann Wicker knew that not just any volunteer would do. That thing wanted her. It had taken her great-grandfather from Black Hollow first. And over the years it had fed on whatever scraps it came across while trapped in those woods. But by digging up and opening the box, they had returned its hunger, its power, and it wanted blood. It wanted her blood. It wanted her history. Maddie told Jesse to just give her his knife and go on home. She took off her gree-gree bag and held it out to Jesse. Jesse stared at the bag, stared at Maddie, working out in his head if he could live with himself as a coward for the rest of whatever life he had left. Coming to the decision that he had no intention of telling the tale of how he left Maddie to face whatever evil was out in them woods all alone when he was on his own deathbed, Jesse reached out and closed Maddie's hand around the small cotton bag. You've got the box, I've got the knife. Jesse spoke softly. I ain't leaving you. Jesse told Maddie that they were all responsible for digging up that box and they would put that son of a bitch back in the ground together. Maddie, frustrated at Jesse's stubbornness but deep down thankful that he was sticking with her, let the tension from her body go and leaned into Jesse, pressing her forehead to his chest. Comforting her with his hand on her upper back, Jesse decided that lying to Maddie might not be the worst idea right now, and reassured her that they were going to live to see themselves grow old. With that, not knowing if they would even see the sunset, let alone see themselves as old folks, the pair walked into the woods. Stepping foot into the forest, they left the sunlight behind and found themselves swallowed up by darkness. The silence was deafening, but for whispers that swirled and danced around the trees. As they reached the old oak, the X carved into it appearing deeper than it had the night before, the oak itself seemed to be resolved to carry the eternal pain of the scar it had been marked with. The hole they had dug still laid open, a stench rising up out of it that turned Jesse and Maddie's stomachs. It stunk like God's rotted flesh, an odor so foul it stuck to the roofs of their mouths and pulled the bile out of their bodies as they both vomited and gasped for breath. And that's when they heard it. A voice, not so much a sound but a physical presence in their ears, like a wet finger circling the rim of a glass, or meat being torn off the bone. There is a fire in these hills, brothers and sisters. A fire that does not burn, but a fire that consumes. Their teeth suddenly felt loose, and they realized that not only were they hearing the voice like an echo, like they had already heard the words before they were spoken, but that with every word there were distinct voices. Voices that had been extracted from decades of torture, forming the messages they were hearing. It lives in the crooked oak, in the empty silo, in the marrow of your children's bones. The voice came out like some ancient dark melody, resembling a nursery rhyme sung backwards and inside out. Underlying beneath it all was the buzz of insects swarming around their meal. I have seen the plowman of souls walking these hollows. As Jesse and Maddie struggled to reconcile with what they were hearing, the woods began to glow as lanterns, seemingly endless numbers of them, lit up and burned black, swallowing the faintest of light that had been peeking through the treetops. You think this is God's earth? You think these pines reach toward heaven? Fools! These trees go downward. Their roots clutch the walls of that dark kingdom where the first McCready still swings from his own guts. Out of that darkness stepped something like a shadow, but not a shadow, more like something that had simply been erased from the light. The air around it vibrated like a haze of heat flickers over cement. What stepped out seemed to be about 8 feet tall, if not 12 feet. It was hard to be sure, as it seemed to bend its own appearance at will. It stood perfectly still in front of that hole. What should have been its eyes were just empty sockets with what looked like scattered birds' nests protruding from them. They gazed at Jesse and Maddie. As horrific as this thing was, the two couldn't look away from it. Jesse muttered out the word, "Papaw?" The thing was wearing Jesse's grandfather's smile, tobacco-stained teeth, but the gums blackened roots, each one squirming like earthworms in rain. Its lips peeled back further than humanly possible, exposing what looked like a second mouth deeper back, with this mouth being filled with crooked teeth that resembled fragments of animal bones. As Maddie unwillingly looked at its face, she flinched in horror as her mouth opened and tried to let out a scream. But she was seeing her mother's face, the skin porcelain smooth until it rippled and withered, revealing thousands of embedded baby teeth beneath the surface. Wrinkles in the skin were stitched in with pink embroidery thread, the same shade Maddie had used for her sister's doll clothes. A lullaby hummed in perfect harmony with Maddie's own pulse. She was still trying to force a scream, but she found her voice matching the pitch of the hum, becoming a part of the song. That's when the lullaby cut off mid-note, like someone pulled a needle off a record. There was absolute silence. No wind, no insects, not even Jesse and Maddie's own breathing. Just the wet, hot pressure of the pines holding its breath. Every lantern in the trees seemed to get snuffed out all at once, except for one. That lone remaining lantern swung violently, casting light that didn't illuminate, but that peeled away the world in layers. Jesse's vision shifted and snapped backwards. He suddenly saw the Gristle Crown still standing at the tree, its face a mangled mess of the faces that used to belong to the people of Black Hollow. And immediately the thing already was in mid-step toward Jesse and Maddie, and then it was inches from his face, all in the span of a single heartbeat. Jesse's brain couldn't reckon the thing's movement, and he felt nauseous all over again. The Gristle Crown's first step wasn't a footfall. It sounded more like the wet thud of a butcher's cleaver sinking into the cutting block. The ground bubbled up black oil from beneath the thing's feet. Maddie felt the Gristle Crown before she saw it. The smell of moldy church books flooded her nose. Her hair lifted static straight. Her fillings burned cold with a taste of battery acid. The Gristle Crown lurched forward without bending its knees, its torso staying perfectly upright while its legs stretched like taffy to close the distance. The trees seemed to lean away as it passed, their roots cowering in fear. As the Gristle Crown came to a stop, its feet creating ruptures in the ground all around them, the earth cracked and tore apart, with all crevices winding and spilling into the hole that had been dug the night before. And then, as Maddie and Jesse weren't already drowning in a heap of torment that shattered any idea they might have had about reality, from that hole crawled Cole, Riley, and Tyler. They weren't exactly alive. They were just different and wrong. Cole's spine had unfurled into a barbed whip, lashing at the trees as if he were the ringmaster and they were circus lions. His mouth was sewn shut with fishing line, muffling his screams into wet gurgles instead. His eyes spilled blood as they appeared sunken back deeper into his skull. Riley's arms were branch-woven with thick bark, and her fingers split into root tendrils. Her eyes glowed with the same darkness of the lanterns that had swallowed the light in the forest. Her chest was still burst open with flora sprouting out. The pine needles locking her mouth closed had grown longer and had pierced clear through her chin down past her neck. The names she had carved into her own flesh pulsed and flared like smoldering embers. Tyler emerged from behind Cole and Riley, gasping like a drowning man breaking the water's surface at the last second. His face was whole again, his tongue pink and healthy, like he had just been ordered out of a trance by a hypnotist. Tyler took in the entirety of the scene unfolding in front of him and then locked eyes with Maddie and Jesse. "You gotta run!" Tyler screamed. "The hole's not a grave! It's a door!" Maddie burst out in tears and lurched towards Tyler, wanting more than anything in this world to grab him and pull the three of them out of this nightmare. But before she could reach him, Tyler's pupils dilated into black pits, and a different voice emerged. It was coming out of Tyler's mouth, coming out of Tyler's lips, but it weren't Tyler's voice. From his mouth, in the same cadence they had heard before the Gristle Crown appeared, a voice rose from Tyler and filled the air. "Tonight, the Gristle Crown fits a new head. Who among you will wear it? Who among you will kneel in the dark furrow and pray backwards until your tongue blackens and splits? The harvest comes due. Who shall sow it?" With that, Tyler's body began decaying. His hair fell out in clumps. His teeth clattered to the ground, and his chest split open like a lightning-struck oak. Jesse and Maddie's faces started to twist in repulsion, but before they could react, Cole and Riley were surrounding them as the Gristle Crown watched on. Jesse grabbed the shovel from the night before off the ground. its edge still crusted with the box's dirt. As Cole lunged forward, Jesse swung the shovel with all he had. The metal sung like a church bell as it landed dead center, splitting Cole's chest open. But where blood should have been spurting out, instead oozed black pollen covering Cole like a moss. The tendrils from Riley's hands wrapped around Maddie's throat, squeezing all the breath out of her body as she was pulled forward. Maddie desperately fought to free herself, and when she was close enough to Riley, she dug her fingers into Riley's eye sockets, trying to rip and tear at the flames where pupils once were. Riley relented and gave Maddie her breath back, but the flames had branded Maddie's hands with X's. As Maddie held out her palms, watching smoke rise up out of them, she felt Riley lean into her ear and heard her whisper, "You'll need these to see in the dark." Maddie turned around and found Jesse. Cole had a fistful of Jesse's hair and was dragging him closer to the hole. Maddie got to her feet and tried running toward Cole and Jesse, but roots popped through the ground like they were nails being hammered through wood and climbed up Maddie's legs, twisting around her before she once again felt Riley's tendrils wrap around her neck. Once at the hole, Tyler threw Jesse towards it, his spine unfurled and writhed from side to side like a predator's tail before they strike their prey. Before Jesse could get his wits about him, he felt the flesh on his back rip open as Tyler's spine lashed out at him. Crack! Another lash. Crack! The lashing continued as Jesse heaved himself into the hole to escape the whipping. The hole was deeper and wider than it had been dug the night before, and as Jesse fought back to his feet, he felt the dirt shifting and rumbling underneath him, trying to swallow him. Jesse shot his hands up and grabbed the edge of the hole and yanked one of his feet free from the earth. As he got his footing, he saw Tyler appear at the hole, his head contorted to the side, watching Jesse struggle. Palms still burning, Maddie grasped a tendril wrapped around her neck and squeezed. A shrill shriek arose from somewhere inside Riley as she relinquished her grip on Maddie and recoiled to smolder and tenderness to her side. Maddie rolled her backpack from her shoulders and swung it at Riley, landing a blow that sent Riley backwards into the hole. Maddie, possessed by fear and maybe a bit of her ancestor's spite, snatched the small box from the backpack and screamed for Jesse to throw his knife to her. Jesse, with one hand gripped around Cole's leg, reached back with his other hand and grabbed the knife from the sheath on his belt. Maddie picked the knife up as it landed on the ground at her feet and without hesitation dragged the sharp edge across her forearm, letting the blood flow out and onto the carvings that marked the box. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, we return what we stole from the dark. Maddie spoke the words as Miss Abigail's voice danced around her. With her blood spilled and the words spoken, Maddie Ann Wicker dropped the box into the hole. Cole turned in her direction as a spine whipped at her, but Jesse had found his footing and pulled himself up using Cole to do it. Jesse took a hold of the shovel in Cole's chest and tore it away before hauling off and walloping Cole with enough force to send him rolling down into the hole. As the hole filled up with dirt, burying anything in it, Jesse yelled to Maddie, "It has to have a volunteer!" Before Maddie could protest, Jesse shoved his arm into the hole in hopes that it wasn't too late for it to swallow him whole and free Maddie of the curse they had dug up. The dirt filled in around Jesse's arm and the ground began to pull him in like an anaconda sucking its victim deeper and deeper into its body. Then Jesse felt a sharp pain as he heard his flesh once again tear apart. Then came the sound of bone cracking. Another flash of white-hot pain, and then the earth released Jesse. With that, the air in the forest rushed back. The wind blew through the trees. Light pierced the veil of the woods. Jesse sat almost catatonic, staring at the hole before the silence around him popped and he could hear Maddie telling him to sit still. His head turned towards the right as if it were the first time he'd ever used those muscles, and he saw Maddie kneeling beside him. Then he looked back towards the hole and noticed a forearm sticking up out of the ground. His forearm, the top of it sprouting with pine needles. Jesse looked back at Maddie and saw that his right arm had been severed at the elbow. The shovel, encrusted with dirt and blood, lay beside her. Maddie removed her flannel shirt and was pressing against the stump of Jesse's arm. Jesse finally remembered what words were again and asked Maddie if she was okay. Maddie looked at Jesse and smiled. Jesse's stump sometimes itches, and when he scratches at it, black sap oozes out. His dreams are full of Cole's whip spine cracking like a preacher's belt. Maddie's fire-branded palms glow faintly in the dark, and she can see things in mirrors no one else can, like Riley, standing behind her, holding the doll that once belonged to Maddie's little sister. The oak tree blooms every year with strange fruit, gnarled lumps that, when cut open, contain human teeth and rust. The Gristle Crown got what it wanted, a volunteer for the hole, or at least a piece of one. New hands to tend to the pines, new histories to gnaw on while it waits to be freed once again. Jesse and Maddie find their way back to one another every year on the anniversary of their friend's death. As the years go by, though, both admit that they find themselves forgetting the names of the three kids who got taken by the Gristle Crown. The folks in Black Hollow say that sometimes the fog rolls in thick, and out in those pines, all you can see are 3 lanterns burning as blue as a corpse's lips. So the next time you're deep in the woods and you see a lantern flickering where no lantern should be, count the flames. If they're all blue, walk away. But if one's going dark, start running. Because that means it's finished molting, and it's hungry. Sweet dreams, traveler. The pines are always listening.